Today on the Take On Board podcast, I'm speaking with Sarah Federman about reckoning work and potentially about saving one boardroom seat for the past. We will dive into that. Before we start the podcast today, as always, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. For me, I am on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters, skies, culture, and country. I support Voice, Treaty and Truth for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia, and I encourage others in the Take On Board community to do the same. Now, let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah is on the board of Expeditionary, an applied AI research product and global advisory company, and she's also on the board of Fleur de Lis Summer Camp. Sarah grew up in a global family business where she was privy to board communications, deliberations, pressures, and compromises for 40 years. She is an associate professor of conflict resolution at the University of San Diego's Kroc School of Peace Studies. She is the author of award-winning books Transformative Negotiation and Last Train to Auschwitz, as well as co-authoring anthologies, Introduction to Conflict Resolution and Narratives of Mass Atrocity. In 2022, she testified before Congress concerning the responsibility of US banks to respond to their slavery ties. Her TEDx talk on this topic has been selected by TED's main conference for wider promotion, and we will make sure there is a link to that in the show notes. Sarah, welcome to the Take On Board podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
It is so good to have you here, and I'm really keen to dive on into reckoning and what that looks like in the boardroom. But as always, before we go there, I want to dig a little bit deeper about you. So tell me something about you.
Yeah, so I am somebody who this is probably my third career. I had an advertising career before I found my way here to this reckoning work and becoming a professor at a peace school. And I loved it. I loved traveling around the world. I loved the people that I worked with. And it was a real adventure. And then little by little, I got called back to this almost unwillingly in a way. I was working in Paris and I started to wonder about the role of the railways in the Holocaust. And I started poking at a question that little by little just sort of took over my life. And now my whole life is different.
Tell me this reckoning work. Well, actually, let's start. What is reckoning in your world? What is reckoning and what is reckoning work?
Yeah, so reckoning, like most traditions, religious traditions, all have a way to reckon or atone for any kind of upset in the community, right? Because as long as people have been living together, they've also been upsetting each other. And you can't just you need to find a way back to each other once you've done harm. And so all religions that I know of have some way back. And then after World War II, we started to create political ways back. And I know Australia has done so much about other ways back there from different kinds of colonial harms and so on. So in the peace field, in peace work, there's been a lot of reckoning happening in that way, trying to figure out how to heal irreparable harms. And we hear universities and seminaries and museums all having to do this. But more and more businesses are finding themselves in these conversations, often unprepared for it, which is why I wrote this book, Corporate Reckoning, that's coming out.
Yeah, I'm not sure boards always do their reckoning. So it'll be interesting to hear some of this. And there is so much that organizations need to reckon for, quite frankly. So how is that showing up? How have you seen it in your work that you do? How have you seen it showing up? I'm wondering if there's a story you can tell us about an organization that might illustrate some of this.
Yeah, I actually will go back to the train case in France, because I was living in France working in advertising. I saw my own name on a Holocaust memorial wall, and it wasn't me. It was a 16-year-old girl who was murdered. And one of my friends had asked me when I moved to France, he said, when you get to Paris, find out if the train drivers kept their jobs after the war. And he met the ones, like, what happened to those people who drove deportation trains? And it's like sort of a haunting question. Like, what happens after, in the aftermath of these things? And I started studying the railroad and the roles that it played in the Holocaust and World War II. But then I started watching the demands for reckoning that started in the 90s and went all the way to 2016. First in France, then the United States, and around the world. So the people who ran the French National Railways by the 90s and after, they didn't know that the role the company played in the Holocaust. They were very surprised. And some of them were even Jewish themselves. And so sort of the shock, I started to see what it's like when executives get these demands for reckoning for something they weren't there for, their families might have suffered from too, and they don't know how to react. So that's what got me interested. And as I studied the railway, I started to see other companies going through this and not knowing what to do and often doing the wrong thing. And I can talk about sort of there's a lot of different ways to do things, but there's some things that just make things worse for the company and for the victims or their descendants.
Oh God! See, I know it'll probably come later, but now that you've mentioned it, you need to go there now. Otherwise, I'll be thinking. So yeah, what are the things not to do?
Yeah. So the temptation when when descendants or survivors come to the company and say, you owe us for the past, is to like quickly throw it to your legal department and maybe your PR department. But this is not like a failed product seal or like, something being the wrong color. Like this is massive irreparable harm. And the pain is far deeper and more complicated. And when legal teams, rightly so, work to defend the company, but when they take such a protective, defensive stance at something that really needs some personal emotive response, it can make things a lot worse for everyone. And it can actually make you more likely to get the law, a lawsuit. So there's other ways to engage with the past before it becomes a legal matter. Because, lawsuits are like war. So we want to deal with this in ways that aren't legal if we can, in going through it. So yeah, I think throwing it to the legal teams, and of course there's far worse, like the Swiss banks, like shredded evidence and, some Exxon waited for some survivors in Aceh, Indonesia to die. The way they dragged out the case, some wait for survivors to die, others shred documents. There's all kinds of terrible things they can do, but most probably would make the mistake of throwing it to the lawyers right away and not
Interesting. As a lawyer, that pains me to hear, but I totally understand it. No. So I'm thinking of how reckoning might be showing up in Australian organisations, and there's so many ways. There is for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia, there was a stolen generation, kids that were removed from their parents. There would be also, I was previously on the board of the Women's Hospital here in Victoria. Back in the day, the Women's Hospital was involved in forced adoptions, was involved in the stolen generation, because that's what organisations did then. And so it's interesting, there is still, reckoning around some of those things happening now, I guess. But, colonialism and lands being stolen that benefits organisations, there is a lot of reckoning to be done, I think.
To do. Yeah. And I just want to say, I think working with the legal teams makes sense, but the idea is making it only a legal issue is where it gets wrong. You want to work with the whole board. Any groups that do reckoning work, big corporations, you need to get the whole board on board and talk about why you're doing it and socialize sort of everyone to the idea, and that it's not just about blaming people of today. It's not saying they did these things. It's saying, well, we've inherited the good reputation and we've benefited from that, but we've also inherited this that we have to address as well. Not saying you have to stop doing all your activities and look back, but saying we have some skeletons that we have to speak to.
Yes. And for many organizations, they've grown up in a different time where these things are, inverted commas, normal or at least common, and
or legal.
Then down the track do not stand the test of time in that way. So, in your work, I think there's some examples that you've talked about where board members in particular, but organisations have really taken on this reckoning work. I think there's Yale, The Guardian, John Hopkins and others. I'm wondering if you might be able to share one of those stories with us.
Yeah, The Guardian was one that I thought was really wonderful. So the newspaper in the UK, they had some people, they started to realize that, wait a minute, how were we found? Where did our money come from to start The Guardian? And they found that it came from a number of people, some slave owners in the Caribbean, I believe. And they were like, oh my gosh, that's our founding money. Like, we are this like justice, call it out newspaper. What are we going to do? And so the Scott Trust is what owns the Guardian. And they set up a restorative team of some in-house people and some external people, restorative team, because it's like a restorative form of justice. It's not looking at punitive. And they thought about, what can we do? And the first thing they did, which you always have to do, is, what the heck did we do? Who were these people? And they say we, but what did they do? Who were they? So they went and found the plantations. They visited the place, and they created a whole response and made a 10-year plan for how they're going to do it. And that was just beautiful to me, because it wasn't like what can we do this quarter and then move beyond it. They really went into it, and they did all kinds of things. Like, they even created like a scholarship for Black journalists in the UK. But then they decided to increase the coverage on the islands where the plantations had been located. Like, they designed a reckoning and atonement approach that really suited what their organization was involved with.
And again, there are so many organizations, I think, when they look to their past, will have, I don't know, stolen wages, stolen people, stolen land. That will show up in so many organizations. And I guess maybe one of the first steps I'm hearing there is actually just dig for the truth, dig for what is around in there.
Yeah, you just need to know if your company's older than 50 years, there's something in the past that likely your company wasn't proud of. And I want to make the distinction between like maybe an advertising campaign that just doesn't land today the way that it did in the 50s or 60s. That's not the same thing as like, flooding an entire community and displacing them or stealing the children, right? Forced adoptions and things like that. I'm talking about sort of mass harm. But it's just so important for people to realize that these legacies live in the present, and maybe not for those of us who didn't do them, but they're living in the communities still. The imprint is still there. And any company that's doing like an ethics training or has a values or mission statement that had a role in one of these things and doesn't acknowledge it, it really sets them up for sort of an inauthentic call you out situation. So companies can simply start their values statement or their trainings by saying, this is what we did great in the past, this is where we failed, and this is who we are today, and this is how we're doing better. It just can be part of the story. It isn't like just beating yourself with a hammer to like punish yourself. That's not what this work is.
And it's so interesting, because I imagine, lifting the cover on what's happened in the past for people and organizations, I imagine there is quite a bit of guilt, collective and individual guilt, that some feel that makes them want to squash it. I guess it's like, I don't want to deal with that, or I don't want to hear it again, or I've heard it once, therefore it doesn't need to be repeated at our induction for new employees or something like that. I'm wondering.
Actually, that's really, I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's true. Like, I've heard it. So like, I know about slavery, so I don't need to talk about it anymore, or we said it. When Yale, so interesting, both Yale and I believe Costco have taken their whole board of trustees to the Legacy of Slavery Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, to help them understand. It's so well done. There's a memorial, there's a whole museum. But even though you could read about it, it's something about the way they present it. You're like, oh wait, I had no idea. Like the impact on this, the community and their descendants. And then it helped them move forward from there. So I'm sure there are sites too, commemorative sites that you all have, right? That people can go to, and they're learning sites.
Yeah, totally. For folks that are in Australia and probably in Victoria, although maybe over the South Australian border, there is a place called Budjabim in the southwest of Victoria, which is the traditional lands of the Gunditjmara people. And they have, eel farming, and they have this whole tour you can do down there. And I've definitely heard, I've done the tour with a leadership group, but I've certainly heard of boards, particularly the boards of some of the organisations that are based down there. And I'm thinking particularly in the health sector, the health outcomes for First Nations people in Australia are not what they should be and are lesser than they are for others. And being able to go and have a look at Gunditjmara country, Budjabim, and to hear the stories, essentially, of the massacres that occurred really, I think, gives, as you say, a really, it just gives
right?
the full, it really sits with you. And it's hard, you can't unsee it. Once you've seen or unhear those stories.
Yeah. And what the hope, right, of visiting these sites and visiting these things is both to address the legacies in the present, but also to be like, who do we want to be when we're on the planet? What footprint do we want to leave? And I know there's so much focus on the present, but there is a way that looking at the past helps us get a little distance from the present and say, how are we going to be remembered? Holy cow, what are we going to be judged for? And it doesn't take long to start to get that list. But the looking backward is sort of a gentler way in some ways.
Absolutely. Well, that's true too, because it could be, this wasn't me. Like
right.
It's not a person. It is a collective responsibility rather than an individual responsibility. Yes. So I'm interested, you talked about having a board seat, a seat for the past. Tell me more about that. What is it and where is it played out?
This has really emerged for me really organically because I kept watching France trying to close the door on World War II. Like it had us like the High Court of France, which is said, okay, no more lawsuits related to the World War II. Sorry, we've done our best, but we can't just keep paying. Like eventually it has to end. It's an administrative nightmare. And then, there were different ways they would try to, and then the train company's like, we did it. We studied our history. We're done. And then I just kept seeing like, you just can't hold the past down. It just has a way of sneaking up. And so I was like, okay, so maybe we just have to leave a seat at the table for the past. Like, you don't have to make the whole party about the past, but we just need one chair there because it's going to break down the door if we don't do that. And when I think about boards and the problems there, we're very future oriented, of course, because we're trying to see what's happening now and how it's going to affect the future. And I was always haunted, and I knew I would find a purpose for it, of that saying on the plane, which I'm sure you have too, the nearest exit may be behind you. Does it say, you say that on your planes too? We always say that here, right?
Absolutely.
Nearest exit may be behind you. And I was like, I know there's some like deep truth in that, but I can't figure it out. But it took me about 40 years. And now I think it is. Some problems, the nearest exit to those problems might actually be from looking back, right? We might actually have to look back. It doesn't mean living there. It doesn't mean spending all our time where I understand companies aren't historians. But what it means is saying, okay, we're a heritage brand. We inherited a lot of different things with that. And so we need to have a spot. And that, you could have your historian sitting in that spot. You might have, different sort of people or roles in that spot. It might have a descendant in that spot at a certain time. It might be a rotating chair. But I think if you can leave a seat for it there, it won't crash in the way it's done for other companies.
And does that mean literally the board, the board's made up of 7 people, and one of those people is a descendant or a historian, or is that what, or is it a more metaphoric seat at the table?
Well, that can be done. Like we've seen descendants on boards of homes of former U.S. presidents who had enslaved people, and so that made sense. I was thinking of it more metaphorically. Like I know it's hard enough to get women on boards. I know it's so hard. Like I don't know if we can get any more seats, but I was thinking about one of the challenges that I have seen for women on boards is feeling like you need to justify being there, that you can play like the boys at the table. And that can be if you're always talking about ethics or you're always talking like playing the female role, you just get pigeonholed in that. And it's very difficult. It's just very difficult to navigate. But one way to talk about some issues that you may care about is by talking about the past. So talking about history can be a way of bringing in some of the values that you wanted to bring in that brought you to the board in the first place without having to go straight for those issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I'm going to tie together a conversation that I had earlier today, but folks on the podcast, you'll have heard it probably a couple of weeks ago now, where we talked about nature in the boardroom. And that's showing up in a range of different ways. Sometimes it is a literal seat at the table. I spoke to a woman late last year, Dominique Hess, who sits on a board as nature in the boardroom. Or it might be more metaphoric as you're referring to it. But one of the reflections from the conversation I had earlier about nature in the boardroom and how it's showing up in the boardroom is that boards and organizations where nature is more showing up, shall we say, often it's from those boards where there might be a person with STEM, science, technology, and so on in the boardroom, or a more humanities base in the boardroom. And in a way, what I'm hearing here is if you've got, what's wrong with historians in the boardroom? Like, it is a different way of looking at things, and it is that diversity of perspective
I
that
love
then
it.
can prompt different thinking in all of the different people around that board table.
Yeah, I actually love that. I love this idea of nature. It's haunting. I think my role on Expeditionary, which is a AI negotiation company, it's to help with large negotiations, is they brought me in because I have this, what about people who aren't at the table? Like, what about the animals? What about those who have no voice? So my job on the board is to be that sort of, hey, what about, I know you're trying to survive, but what about, and how are you going to be remembered? And what about, so that really worked well for me. I was like, okay, I can be that. So it's not quite nature, but it's part of that actually. And now you're helping me sort of frame it in that way. Yeah. And thinking of legacy too,
Yes.
while
And
they're dealing with the day-to-day business.
And even some organizations I've heard, again, it's not a spot in the boardroom, so to speak, but some boardrooms will have I've heard of one organization that has a doll that sits in the boardroom, and I can't remember its name. It's got a name, but it is a customer of that organization. And it is
Love it.
I guess, a representation in the
Yeah.
boardroom about what we are here for. And it sounds like the past is another possible, like there's all sorts of
Yeah.
representations that could literally or metaphorically be in the boardroom. And the past is another one of those that might assist boards to think about their reckoning. And so many organizations, as we said before, there would be whatever it might be, stolen people, stolen wages, stolen land, leaving aside stolen children. There is a whole range of things that an organization might need to reckon
And
with
rather,
and
and
for.
when you have, yeah, and when you have that seat of the past, and maybe it should be an actual seat, so you're starting to convince me, that you may want to, if you're going to do any contributions, make those contributions related to addressing the harm that the company created. And so often I see we did this horrible thing, but we give to the opera. And it's like, I love the opera and I support the arts and I think it's wonderful to give to them. And it's a little deflection from, what was done. And I think it would be more meaningful and even strengthen the company in ways that might be seen and unseen to actually do the work that's left undone by the predecessors.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And it's hard work to,
It's hard.
and I
It's
love
less
that.
comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And long term, was it the Guardian you talked about, their 10-year plan?
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully they'll renew it. Yes, it's irreparable harm. People are upset. But by facing it, there's just so much more integrity. Like the integrity strands of the company gets stronger.
Oh, Sarah, there is so much in here, so much to cover in half an hour. I'm wondering, what are the key things you want people to take away from the conversation that we've had today?
Yeah. If I'm even a customer of, or an employee of, or went to university of some older institution, get curious about that history. Not like a gotcha history, but like get connected to it. Like, do you know your university's history? Do you know your bank's history? Do you know, and when you know them, one, it actually helps reduce some of the alienation a lot of us feel in our times. Uh, And it doesn't make it so scary. Like we start to take the pieces back that we've lost. And when you're part of an organization that wants to do this work, one, encourage them. And two, if they're trying and not doing it right, encourage them and help them do it better. I hope we don't just like call them out for not doing it perfectly, but really sort of be like, okay, good start. I love that you're addressing it. Now just, yeah, try it more this way,
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't imagine this work is ever done.
No,
I just can't imagine.
History,
Go, oh,
new
good.
things come up all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, that's right. There's new history. Like we can wrestle with 50 and 100 and however many years ago. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh God, times have moved on again. And we've, again, messed something up, which hasn't stood the test of time. And yeah, interesting. So it is an ongoing piece of work, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Okay. Is there a resource you would like to share with the Take On Board community?
Yeah, I mean, I ended up writing this book on how corporations can do it, giving lots of examples from around the world, from different atrocities. And it's supposed to just be like, hey, you probably weren't trained how to do this. It's supposed to be welcoming, not punishing. So that'll be out. But I think it's accessible. If you're having trouble explaining why do this, I tried in the TED Talk to like say why. Some people will never agree, and that's okay. We're all different.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure we've got links to both of those in the past. And it's interesting. In fact, I'm going to draw back to something you said much earlier in the conversation about restorative justice versus punitive justice. So I love that that's come through in your book as well, by the sounds of things. It's not punitive. We're all just trying to help here. We're trying to restore, not punish.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think, yeah, well, and it would just become overwhelming if it was punitive, I think, and nobody will want to wrestle with the past. So I love that approach. So, yeah, we will make sure there is links to all of that in the show notes. Oh, Sarah, thank you. It's such important work, and it makes my brain hurt a little bit in a way to reckon with how to reckon, because it is so like the work is never done. It's wrestling with things you weren't around for. There's no clear answer.
Oh,
it is
but
big
it has
stuff.
gifts. It's so much fun. When I do this for companies and I research their history or help, like things happen. And it's just, I grabbed a grad student for this last one and she's like, this is amazing. I'm like, I know. It's not all drudgery. I just want to say that. It can be really fascinating and healing and moving and
Exactly. Well, I know, like I say, go to places like Budgebim and there are others around Australia. It is all of those things. Fascinating, moving, healing, hard. It can be all of those things at once. So it's good to hear that some of this work has that as well. Otherwise, it'd be like, oh my gosh, you just must need a large glass of wine at the end of every day. Thank you so much for the conversation today. Thank you so much for the work that you do. It's so important. And coming and sharing some of your wisdom with the Take On Board community today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for what you do.